The wagon slid across the ice as if the ground had forgotten how to hold weight. The horse hesitated, iron shoes skidding for a single beat. Then the cart tilted. The canvas slipped loose, and what lay beneath dropped straight into the crack that had just split the river open. There was no heavy impact, only a dry, sharp fracture, like a breath held too long and finally released. Half of the man's face surfaced, clouded white by cold, one eye wide open and staring into the gray sky. The Yoda River kept the rest, beneath the ice, calm, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. You stand on the bank and feel the cold is not only in the wind, it lives in the silence that follows the kind of silence that makes sound unnecessary. Wind from upstream carries the damp ash smell of wood burned to green. A church bell drifts from far away, its pull uneven like the tired hand of the one drawing the rope. The ice fractures again, a thin line running parallel to the shore, long and narrow like a crack in human skin. You walk along the edge, listening to the brittle sound beneath your boots, and wonder how many fractures a place can hold before it finally breaks. At the bend where dead grass pushes through the snow, a boy stops. He leans close to the ice and breathes, fogging a small patch. Beneath the surface, a black thread moves, not one shape, but many linked together their backs, brushing the ice and forming a shifting pattern of dark pulses. Rats moving inside the river or tight along its edge, persistent and silent. The boy reaches out, then pulls his hand back, as if he has touched something that should not be named. When he looks up, his eyes are different, and you know that some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. You leave the river and head toward the village. The wooden road creaks dryly before disappearing under snow. At the gate, people gather in small knots, close enough to hear far enough to avoid responsibility. The sickness is spreading from the western towns, they say. Whole households are collapsing in a single night. Even the strongest can fall without warning. No one wants to name it because naming is an invitation across the threshold. Some clasp their hands in prayer. Others spit on the ground and grind it underfoot. Both believe they are doing what is necessary. The decision comes quickly. The gate will close at night. Strangers will be restricted. Wagons will enter only with permission. The choice is not made from courage, but from organized fear. But when the talk turns to food, the tone changes. Winter is long. The communal stores are thinning. To keep the gate shut, bellies must stay full. And to keep bellies full, they must rely on Heinrich's granary. His name is spoken like a familiar marker. Heinrich's storehouse stands at the edge of the village with thick walls, heavy wood, and a new lock. People say he understands rats better than people. They say his grain has never been eaten down to the core. When a community needs safety, it often chooses a place whose key belongs to someone else. The gate guard is assigned to distribute flour. The meal is poured out and mixed by eye because the scale has rusted. As his hand turns the powder, a smear appears black and fine, like soot. He pauses and looks around. No one notices. He mixes again. The stain thins and disappears into the white. He tells himself it is mold or dirt from the sack. He does not say anything. Hiding is easier than explaining. The loaves that come from the oven look ordinary. Their scent faint, but enough to reassure. You wonder when covering a small mark became the easiest choice. Dusk arrives early. Fog creeps up from the river, slow and thick, like something that knows the way. From a distance you see Heinrich, walking along the granary fence, an oil lamp in his hand. The flame trembles against dry planks. His steps are steady, unhurried, without doubt. The lock hangs heavy on the door, new and bright. People say Heinrich once starved, once lost everything, and learned from that day how to never let lack return. Some vows are born from fear, and some vows demand payment from others. Night settles more heavily than usual. The wind shifts, carrying the river's smell as far as the old mill. You hear the first sound halfway home. Not footsteps, not wood, scratching slow and measured like someone tapping a rhythm from inside a wall. It stops, then resumes unhurried, unbothered, as if the one making it knows the door will not open. You stand still, your heart matching the tempo, and realize the sound is coming from Heinrich's granary. You think of the river, holding its breath beneath the ice of the village gate, sealed shut of the dark smear, stirred into white. You wonder how many doors a community can lock before it locks away its ability to face the consequences of its own choices. The river cracks again in the night. The scratching continues. No one comes out to open the door. Morning had not yet reached the village, but it had already reached the granary. Heinrich opened the door while dew still clung to the wooden latch, and the cold smell of the old night spilled out like a breath held too long. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, letting the oil lamp draw a low circle of light, just enough to mark the familiar paths. You follow him with your eyes, noticing how he moves without hesitation, without a wasted step. This is where he belongs, where things remain still if he wishes them to. Heinrich bends beside a trap set tight against the wall. He lifts it, tests the spring wipes, the metal bar with a dry cloth. His hands are clean nails, trimmed short skin, rough from winter. But when he turns his wrist, there is still dark powder beneath the nails, fine and clinging. Heinrich looks at it for the length of a breath, longer than necessary, then rubs his hands together as if motion alone could erase it. You see that he is not unsettled, only careful like a man who knows there are marks best kept unseen. Memories do not need doors. They enter on the scent of damp grain, on the sound of metal touching wood, on the hunger that lies quiet beneath careful work. Heinrich remembers the low kitchen from many winters ago, dim light walls, sweating with cold. His mother stood at the stove, her back bent, her hands unsteady. She hid a small piece of bread beneath a cloth, not from greed, but from hope. The rats came at night, fast and precise. When Heinrich woke, the bread was gone, leaving only crumbs and small tooth marks. His mother sat down on the floor, breathing heavily, not complaining. She weakened day by day, then lay still as if hunger had finished what it came to do. Heinrich remembers the emptiness that followed not only in the belly, but in every choice that came after. From that winter, Heinrich carried a vow that needed no words. Never let shortage return. Never let chance take control. He studied rats the way others studied letters. He learned their routes, their habits, the sense that made them turn aside. He learned how to build a granary, not only to store, but to guide. Empty spaces were placed where rats disliked them, and grain was scattered where he wanted them to go. He did not need to kill them all. He only needed to control the flow. While others lost harvests to misfortune, Heinrich's stores held. When the village went hungry, his house had bread. Wealth came slowly, season after season. Heinrich hired a few guards for the granary, paying them just low enough to keep them from asking questions, just steady enough to bring them back. He was neither warm nor cruel. Everything was spoken in numbers and time. Stand here. Watch until this hour. Report any sound. No need to ask why. No need for sympathy. Punctual payment created a quiet loyalty, enough for his purposes. In the village, people called him by function rather than name. The keeper of grain. The rat catcher. The one who does not lose. Heinrich's past was not mentioned because hunger is not a story people want to hear when they need a key. But when the gate closed and flour became the thing that kept order, the village head came to the edge of the settlement. He stood beneath the granary awning, breath-turning white, staring at the heavy new lock. Heinrich opened the door just enough for light to spill out in a narrow band. You feel the distance being carefully maintained, like a rule that does not need to be written. The conversation was short and direct. The village needed the granary, open for relief to prevent unrest. Heinrich listened, his eyes fixed on the ground where frost was thickening. Then he set his conditions. Land as collateral, debts recorded. Labor was exchanged for food. He spoke of rat risk, of the long winter of lessons people forget once their bellies are filled. His voice did not rise. The numbers did their work on their own. You see, the choice being offered is not between good and evil, but between conditional safety and uncontrolled uncertainty. The village head left without a complete answer. The villagers accepted, half reluctant, half grateful. Bread was distributed, order preserved. and at the same time a thin layer formed between those standing in line and the granary door. Resentment does not need words to grow. It only needs time and the feeling of being placed under terms. People ate their bread and remembered who held the key. The whisper shifted direction, no longer speaking only of the sickness far away, but of the granary close at hand. Heinrich returned to his familiar inspection. He walked the walls, laid his hand against the wood, listening for the silence between sounds. To him, the granary was a body that needed balance. As dusk settled, he carried a sack of grain to the corner where lamplight did not reach. He poured the kernels slowly and evenly, forming a low path. Not waste, but guidance. Rats take the easiest route. If that route does not cut through the core of the store, he considers the work done. A child stood at the edge of the light, hidden behind a wooden post. It watched the grain fall and vanish into shadow. It watched how Heinrich tilted the sack, how he paused to listen as if waiting for a response. The child did not understand structure, scent, or habit. It only saw an adult feeding something that was not human. When Heinrich turned, the child stepped back, silent, carrying an image that would not be easily forgotten. Night settled over the granary like a heavy cloth. Heinrich locked the door, hung the key at his belt, and walked away with the same steady steps as every evening. Beneath the ice, the river held its breath. Inside the granary, small movements found their paths. And in the village, the conditions just accepted began to turn into debts that did not need writing, waiting for the day they would be remembered. You wake to pounding in the middle of the night, not the rhythm of human hands, but metal striking wood in disorder. Traps crashing against the wall, clattering without plea or pattern. Rats do not knock. They test what will give first. When you open your eyes, the cold is already inside the room, as if it never left. You pull on your coat and step outside, following the oil lamp toward the granary. Heinrich is there a moment before you. He stands at the door, listening, not in a hurry to open it. The traps rattle once more, and then fall silent like a question swallowed whole. When the door opens a crack, the lamp sweeps across the wooden floor, across traps trembling faintly. There are no dead rats, only the signs of something learning patience. Morning arrives, wrapped in thick fog. Wagons carrying bodies roll along the wooden road wheels, muted by snow. You see Father Wilhelm standing by the roadside, his cloak thinner than the cold requires. He recites prayers quickly, not from lack of faith, but because the living have no time to linger. Each wagon passing is a reminder that the sickness is no longer distant. It has entered the rhythm of the village. That same morning, Heinrich replaced the old lock with a new one. The metal is bright and heavy, hanging on the door like a declaration. Another guard is stationed, kept far enough from the entrance that small sounds will not reach him. The rules are repeated, clear and cold. The granary opens by the clock, distribution by ledger, no exceptions. You realize how a locked door does more than keep things in. It shapes how people speak to one another. A tenant family arrives before the fog lifts. You stand close enough to see the father's hands trembling as he clasps them together. The mother holds the child, a damp cloth wrapped around its forehead, now stiff and dry. They do not step toward the door. They remain at the boundary, where asking and trespass are separated by a single step. The father speaks softly, his voice worn thin by a long night. The child burns with fever, breathing shallow. They ask for a small sack, only one. They promise repayment in labor in whatever remains to them. Heinrich listens without meeting their eyes. He says the rules are the rules, not raised, not angry, just a sentence that stands firm. You see the choice laid bare without ornament. Preserve order by refusal or open a gap. No one knows how wide it will grow. Heinrich chooses order. The door does not open further. The lock does not move. The family leaves. Snow keeps their footprints small and hurried. The mother adjusts the cloth on the child's head as if the gesture can still accomplish something. No one turns back. No one calls out. When the granary door closes, you realize the silence is not empty. It is full of what remains unsaid. The next morning, crying rises from a low house near the riverbank. You arrive before the sun climbs high enough to warm anything. The child lies still warmth, already gone. There is nothing gruesome to see, only absence. The cloth on the forehead is dry and cold. The mother's crying does not last. It thins out as if the night used up what was left. Father Wilhelm lays a hand on their shoulders. No one asks why. Some questions do not bring the dead back. When Father Wilhelm leaves the house, he stops in the road. You stand beside him and follow his gaze. Through the fog, the granary door appears at the edge of the village. In the snow, small footprints lead toward it, then turn away, fading. Father Wilhelm does not accuse. He only looks as if marking a connection newly formed between a door and a life. Heinrich hears the news at midday. He does not pause his work. Traps are checked. Ledgers are written. Wages are paid on time. You see that he does not rejoice, nor does he collapse. To Heinrich, death lies outside the system, and the system must be preserved to prevent others. That is how he speaks to himself, and it is how he survived winters that showed no mercy. Night falls, and again you hear small sounds from the granary. Heinrich goes to inspect it alone. The lamp glides along the rows of grain sacks. In one corner, a sack has slumped, kernels spilling onto the floor. When Heinrich bends down, you see him stop. The gnaw marks on the fabric are uneven, unlike the rat bites he knows. Deeper, wider spaced, as if something tested its strength and withdrew. Heinrich straightens and listens. There is no scratching, no rhythm, only silence thickening heavier than the new lock itself. Outside, the Oda River still holds its breath beneath the ice. In the village, doors are shut earlier. And inside the granary, as Heinrich studies the unfamiliar marks, you feel for the first time a fracture opening in the belief that everything can be kept safe by rules alone. You see the handprint before you hear footsteps. It is small flour packed thick into every line, pressed clearly against the granary door, like a reminder that needs no words. A child's hand flattened against the wood fingers, spread steady, unmoving. White powder stands out against the dark grain, and in that moment you understand why some marks are not meant to be erased, but remembered. Children arrive in small groups, stopping at a distance, carefully measured, so they will not be driven away at once. They do not push forward. They do not cry. One girl steps ahead, hair tied, tight eyes held level. She does not ask the way adults ask. She simply stands, letting her gaze do the work. You feel the unspoken sentence hanging in the air, a promise that will last longer than any loaf of bread. No words are needed. You hear what it carries. They will not forget. Heinrich opens the door, only far enough for light to slip through. He looks over the children and then stops at the handprint on the wood. His expression does not change.
Yeah.
He waves his hand once, short and final, as if dismissing a thought. The children step back without argument. When the door closes, you see Heinrich take up a broom. He sweeps the handprint away, flour falling to the floor in a pale blur. But when he wipes again, powder remains caught in the grain of the wood, fine and stubborn. He scrubs harder, then stops. Some things once pressed into a groove do not leave by familiar motion. The choice is clearer than you expect. Heinrich could give a small measure of grain enough to quiet the moment, enough for the handprint to vanish with the flour. He does not. He believes every concession opens a path, and paths only widen. He believes in holding a straight line, even when it cuts across a child's eyes. You stand there and realize this decision is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, and because of that, it clings. In the days that follow, flour is still distributed by ledger. The rules hold, but when night falls, some footsteps no longer follow the main road. The children's parents return to the granary without lamplight. They move carefully, not from greed, but because desperation has learned how to bend. You hear cloth brushing wood kernels, rolling softly. This time the traps do not rattle, not because of rats, but because people have learned how to place their feet lightly. They are caught soon after. The granary guard needs a little time to notice what is missing. The village head is summoned. Father Wilhelm stands at the edge, sleeves clenched in his hands, eyes forward without judgment. The punishment takes place in the public square, meant to instruct. There is no excessive violence, only enough to be remembered. The punished stand, with heads lowered, offering no defense. The children watch from a distance. You see something shift in their eyes, difficult to name. Resentment is no longer a vague feeling of hunger. It has an address, a shape, and a door. The handprint on the granary door is scrubbed clean in front of everyone. Heinrich performs the task like a ritual, slow and thorough. But when the light shifts, you still see flour lodged in the grain, faint but present. Some traces do not need to stand out to survive. They wait for time to do its work. In the afternoon, Father Wilhelm passes by the granary. He stops looking at the door, at the snow where the children once stood. He does not speak to Heinrich, not from fear, but from knowing that some things' words only make heavier. You stand nearby and understand the community has slipped another fraction, like ice on the river opening one more thin crack. Night comes and the wind changes direction. The churchyard lies empty, moonlight settling on cold stone. You hear the first sound from a distance, not bells, but a spreading rustle. Rats appear in the open yard, unhurried, unafraid. They gather in a loose circle, noses lifted as if searching for a scent. This is not a place they usually come. You sense the wrongness in how they stand still, as if waiting for a signal. No one comes out to drive them away. The church doors remain closed. The bell stays silent. The rats disperse slowly, leaving thin markings on the stone. You watch them go and wonder who they are searching for or what they are learning to find. At the edge of the village, the granary stands quiet with its wooden door and flour caught in its grooves. Beneath the ice, the Oder River holds its breath, and within the community, a handprint has been erased from sight but has never left the wood. The strongest man in the village collapses in the middle of a clear morning. You are near the riverbank when he passes quickly by. Back straight breath, steady as always. Then he stops one beat too long. His knees give way into the snow, his hands clutching at empty air. There is no cry, no warning. Only the moment when strength leaves a once dependable body. You understand at once that this does not choose the weak. It chooses anyone. News moves faster than the wind. The sickness has arrived, no longer a whisper from distant towns. People gather before the church, praying more often longer, as if stretched time might thin fear itself. Father Wilhelm recites his prayers evenly, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. The bell rings short and sharp, not to invite, but to remind. You watch faces lined beneath the awning and see the subtle shift. Their eyes no longer search for answers. They search for assurance. Heinrich remains wealthy, remains warm. The granary stands sealed, the lock bright guards in place. Bread still comes from the ovens on schedule. It's sent just enough to hold order for another day. You see him cross the yard, coat thick steps firm. In a world beginning to fracture, some things appear unchanged, and that appearance makes people trust them more. A merchant pauses by a fire and speaks quietly to those nearby. You catch the core of it through the crackle of wood. In the neighboring town, rats no longer move alone. They travel in swarms, flooding alleys like a dark current. Those listening nod, offering no challenge. Such information does not need proof. It finds its way into memory, on its own fastening itself to what you have already seen beneath the ice and in the churchyard. Heinrich is advised to leave that afternoon. The advice comes from several directions, wrapped in concern and calculation. Take the grain. Go before the gate tightens further, before roads close under fear. You stand close enough to see his reaction. Heinrich does not flare with anger. He looks instead toward the granary, as if at part of his own body. To leave would mean abandoning the walls he built, the paths he shaped, the numbers he balanced. To leave would mean placing his key in another hand. Heinrich refuses, not out of recklessness, but out of fear of loss. You recognize how this choice resembles caution until it seals off every other path. The consequence does not arrive with thunder. It gathers in smaller things. The road out of the village grows more restricted. Guards change shifts earlier. Wagons become fewer. Heinrich stays with his granary, and the granary stays with him. The door feels heavier as it closes. The lock gleams more brightly where it hangs. You watch him check ledgers, inspect traps, test walls, repeating the actions that once kept him safe. With each repetition, the air thickens, as if the walls are no longer holding grain alone, but holding decisions. Night falls earlier than usual. You pass the granary and hear sounds that do not match memory. Not the quick scurry of rats, not the familiar measured scratching. It is a breath, faint, and even like wind trapped between layers of wood. Heinrich stops lamp steady in his hand. He presses his ear to the wall and listens. The sound does not follow a pattern. It pauses as if whatever is inside is learning how to wait. You see his throat tighten for a beat, then release. No one names what they are not ready to face. The next day, the second healthiest man does not come to work. Prayers grow longer. Some leave the lines early, afraid of standing too close. You see doors closing, sooner fires burning lower. Heinrich continues his rounds, continues paying wages on time. He believes that keeping rhythm is how the world is held together. You begin to understand the cost of that belief. That evening, the merchant returns, stopping outside the gate rather than entering. The news is no better. Rats move in swarms in many places now, not just one. People burn refuse, pour salt, and do everything they were taught. You see Heinrich, listening from a distance, not stepping closer. Leaving now would mean abandoning the granary. Staying means locking himself inside the choice already made. He chooses to stay again, as if repetition might make the first decision correct. When night fully settles, you hear the sound more clearly. Not in the granary, but within the walls of Heinrich's house. Not scurrying, but breathing very even, very close. Heinrich stands in the center of the room, setting the lamp down. As the light trembles, he places his hand against the wall and feels the cold seeping through the wood. The breath stops when he touches it, then resumes lower, like a reply. You realize the granary is no longer a place of storage. It is a place of keeping. Outside, the Oda River still holds its breath beneath the ice. In the village, people pray for the strong because they have seen the strong can fall. And within the walls, Heinrich trusts most. Something is learning how to exist in rhythm with him. You see Heinrich sitting at the table while the bread is still warm. The slices thick, the crust firm steam, rising softly like proof that something ordinary still exists. He breaks off the first piece, slowly chewing with care, listening to the sounds of the house. The fire murmurs in the hearth, and the walls hold heat well. Everything tells you this place is safe. Then through the window, you see someone fall into the snow. No cry, no call. Just a body slipping out of its standing rhythm, leaving behind a pale streak. The contrast is sharp enough that it needs no explanation. Heinrich sets the bread down. He stands and opens the front door just enough to look out. Wind rushes in carrying cold and the scent of a human body. The fallen figure does not rise. Heinrich does not step outside. He signals the guard with a brief gesture, then closes the door again. The unfinished slice lies on the table, cooling faster than it should. You realize how a meal can be cut short without a word. A short while later, someone drags the body away from Heinrich's gate. No ritual, no lingering looks. Heinrich pays immediately enough to have the task done quickly and quietly. Payment to avoid seeing. Payment to avoid remembering. You stand nearby and understand that some transactions do not buy labor, but distance. When the yard is clean again and snow covers the traces, the warm house closes its door as if the event never passed through. In the afternoon, Heinrich inspects the granary as he always does. Traps are placed correctly. Bait is still fresh. He crouches and waits for the familiar sound. There is none. The traps are empty. The bait was untouched. He changes the bait shifts. The placement tries again. The rats do not touch it. You sense this is not a victory. It is a change in an agreement no one signed. The rats are no longer afraid of traps. They have learned, or they are waiting. Darkness falls quickly. The guard stands on the porch, coughing in short, dry bursts. You hear the sound echo into the house, thin and brittle like dead wood. Heinrich opens the door and looks out. The guard bows his head, hands shaking, speaking more with gesture than with words. He asks to come in and warm himself, only for a moment. Heinrich stands in the doorway, listening to the uneven breathing. You see the choice clearly, like lamplight in the dark. Open the door and invite risk inside, or stay warm by keeping a distance. Heinrich chooses distance. He sends the guard away, not harshly, only firmly. The door closes. The lock slides into place. That night is longer. The wind shifts and blows straight across the porch. You pass by and see the guard sitting against the wall, head bowed, breath thinning. No one opens the door. Morning comes snow settling over the body like a covering. There is no commotion, only a silence that becomes familiar. Heinrich does not step outside to look. He stays in the house where the fire still burns. In the morning, as Heinrich laces his boots, you see him pause. The leather strap has been gnawed through unevenly, not severed but weakened, as if something tested it. He bends down and touches the frayed edge. Dark powder clings to his fingertip. The rats have come closer, not into the granary, but into daily life. Heinrich replaces the strap and pulls it tight. You recognize the reflex. When something can no longer be trusted, he replaces it quickly, without asking why. Inside the granary, the traps remain empty. The bait remains untouched. Heinrich walks the walls, resting his hand against the wood, listening. There is no running, no scratching. The absence of sound makes the room heavier. You remember the churchyard and the circle of still rats. There are moments when not acting is a different kind of action. By midday, word of the guard's death spreads. No one accuses Heinrich to his face. Responsibility is divided, diluted into winter. You notice the way villagers look at his door has changed, not with loud resentment, but with a thin, even layer of cold. Heinrich continues to pay wages on time. He continues to check the ledger. He keeps the rhythm, but the rhythm no longer carries others with it. It only holds him in place. As the afternoon fades, you stand in Heinrich's kitchen. The fire burns steadily. Fresh bread emerges from the oven once more. Outside the window, snow keeps falling, covering old and new traces alike. You feel the distance between two worlds is only a door wide. Heinrich lives within the space he controls. Outside the world is learning how to continue without him. When night touches the house, you hear a very small sound from the corner of the room. Not rats running, not traps snapping. A light tap of claws against wood, then stillness. Heinrich turns. Beneath the table, a rat stands unmoving. It does not flee. It does not lower its head to search for bait. It looks straight ahead, black eyes unblinking, reflecting firelight. In that moment, you understand the difference between fear and being watched. Heinrich does not move. The rat does not move. No one yields. Outside, the Oda River holds its breath beneath the ice. And inside the warm house, a gaze has bridged into the cold world. You wake before full dawn, your throat dry, and burning as if the night has drawn every trace of moisture from you. Your fingertips are stiff with cold, not the cold of winter air, but the cold of stone left outside too long. You rub your hands together and wait for sensation to return. It comes slowly in short pulses, like an uncertain promise. Inside the house, the fire still burns, but the warmth does not spread as it used to. You realize your body has begun to work on its own terms without asking permission. Heinrich sits up and drinks a mouthful of liquor before thinking about bread. The heat warms his throat for a moment, just long enough for him to believe everything is still within his grasp. He feeds more wood into the hearth, the flames leaping up bright and aggressive. You see him move faster than usual, as if speed itself could conceal what is beginning to grow. He avoids looking at his hands when he lifts the cup and avoids the return of cold. Morning passes in familiar routines. Heinrich increases the liquor, increases the fire, and seals the house against drafts. He does not go outside often. When he must, he moves quickly without stopping. Villagers see him and look away. You sense the space opening around him, a distance that needs no words. Fear has its own scent, and it teaches people where not to stand. At the granary, Heinrich begins to count the sacks of grain. He does it to steady himself, to force the world back into numerical order. 1, 2, 3. He stops and starts again. The numbers slip through him like dry kernels through open fingers. You see his eyes narrow as he tries to hold the rhythm. He writes strikes through corrects, then strikes through again. Numbers that once stood firm no longer hold still, not because anything is missing, but because his mind is no longer a safe place for them. The cough arrives softly without warning. Heinrich turns away and covers his mouth as if covering it were enough. He tells himself it is only cold, only a long night. You hear those reassurances and know they have worked before for many other things, but the body does not listen to the same voice as the mind. When he presses a hand to his chest, you notice a brief hesitation in his breath, then nothing. He lets it pass. The choice appears without noise. Father Wilhelm is nearby, still holding services, still opening the church doors on schedule. Heinrich knows this. He knows that all it would take is a call of permission for another gaze to enter his house, but with help would come eyes, questions judgment, which he has avoided his entire life. Pride holds him back. He does not want to be the one who asks. He fears loss of control more than illness. Heinrich chooses silence. You see how this choice resembles the ones before it, except this time the locked door is inside. The sickness advances slowly, slow enough for denial to survive. Fever comes and goes, leaving behind a fatigue thick as fog. He sleeps more, but rest does not repay the debt. When he wakes, his throat is dry again. He drinks liquor instead of water, as if the burn might cauterize what is growing. The fire burns all day, wood disappearing quickly. You recognize how temporary measures become habits, and habits become cages. The guards no longer approach. Payment is left at the gate. Goods are taken and carried away. No one stays to speak. You see Heinrich notice, but he does not call out. Loneliness does not arrive with the sound of doors closing, but with the repeated absence of knocks. Inside the granary, the traps remain empty. The bait remains untouched. The silence of the rats stretches on, and it unsettles Heinrich more than scratching ever did. One afternoon, he sits again with the ledgers, trying to force the numbers to stay still. His vision blurs for a beat. When he blinks, the dark powder on his fingers appears thicker. He rubs at it, but it clings. You watch him study the residue, as if it were a question without an answer. He pours more liquor and drinks it quickly. The final total does not align. He strikes the page hard enough to tear the paper. Night comes and the house is warm, but heavy. You stand with Heinrich in that space, listening to wind slip through the seams, in the wood listening to uneven breathing. He sits by the hearth holding his hands close to the fire, as if trying to draw warmth deeper inside. Cold sweat beads and fades. He wipes his brow and does not stop. Outside, the village is quiet. This quiet does not comfort. It feels like withdrawal. You know it is time to call Father Wilhelm. You know he knows it too, but each time the thought rises, Heinrich turns away, finds another task, counts again, feeds the fire. He fears the gaze more than pain. He fears being seen as part of the community more than being the one who holds the key. The choice has been repeated often enough to become instinct. As the night deepens, you hear laughter. Very faint, very distant, like wind passing through the old days. Heinrich lifts his head. The laughter comes again, a little clearer now, carrying the rhythm of a child. He stands and steps onto the porch. Outside, the snow lies empty, no fresh footprints, no human shape. The laughter fades when he stands still, then returns once more, like a memory that refuses to stay buried. Heinrich closes the door and sets the lock. He leans against the wall, breathing slowly. You see his body tremble, not from cold. Inside the warm house, the sickness has found its place. Outside, the cold world keeps its distance. And between the two, Heinrich stands alone, with his choices listening to sounds that no longer need a person to exist. You waking to the sound of metal touching wood. Heinrich is dying and still reaching toward his belt where the heavy ring of keys hangs. His fingers tremble as they search the air, grasping for a familiar shape, the way one reaches for a soul. Each time the keys brush his chest, his breath quickens, then falters. You see clearly that what he clings to is not a door, but the sense of control that kept him alive for too long. His breathing grows shallow. His throat is so dry that liquor no longer helps. The fire in the hearth burns low, its light wavering across the walls. Heinrich opens his eyes one last time and looks towards the granary door as if sight alone could pass through wood. The keys slip from his hand and fall to the floor, the soft impact like a final period that does not wish to draw attention. He lies still. You wait one more beat. There is no next beat. Word travels quickly, but no crying follows it. Villagers gather in small clusters, speaking loud enough to hear quiet enough to avoid responsibility. They talk of justice, of order of choices, repeated too many times. Someone shrugs and says it was God's judgment. No one argues. No one praises. This death leaves no gap that needs filling. It simply settles into a story that fits the fear already present. Father Wilhelm stands before Heinrich's door, his hand resting on the wood without knocking. He looks inside, where the fire has dimmed and the keys lie on the floor. You stand close enough to see his hesitation, stretch longer than it should, to bless or not. Ritual is not only for the dead, but for the living who need order. But which order, the justice of the community or private mercy? Fear has its own voice, whispering of what should not be invited. When the boundary between worlds feels thin, Wilhelm chooses not to perform the full rite. He speaks a few brief words, does not ring the bell, and does not completely sprinkle holy water. The decision is made the way one ties a knot, just tight enough to hold, just loose enough to pull free. You see him tell himself, this will keep the village safe. You also see that he does not look back as he walks away. Heinrich is buried at the edge of the wasteland, where dead grass meets snow and wind from the river blows straight across. There is no procession, no long sermon. A rough wooden stake is driven into the ground as a marker, leaning slightly in the frozen soil. No name, only a shape. The earth is filled in quickly, no hands lingering. You sense the distance being carefully maintained, as if this ground might spread something if stood upon too long. When everyone leaves, the Oda River lies nearby, its ice thinner along the bank. Wind carries damp cold, mixed with the scent of freshly cut wood. You remain a moment longer watching the stake and the clear outline of the grave. Nothing happens at once. Waiting itself is an action. Night falls early. Fine snow drifts down, covering everything, evenly softening edges. You return to the burial place in thought as if drawn by a thread. On the first night, the ground around the grave is no longer smooth. Footprints mark the snow, small and scattered, circling the wooden stake. No human tracks are leading in or away. Only light impressions, as if something tried to stand and then changed its mind. By morning, the prints remain. The wind has erased other paths. Villagers look from a distance, then turn away. No one asks. No one records it formally. The stake stands still. The earth remains quiet. You understand this is where unwritten rules begin to work. Ground that is left unblessed does not keep what is placed within it at rest. Things that are ignored do not vanish. They wait. Father Wilhelm walks along the river and sees the ice split with another thin crack. He pauses, exhales, and continues. You see, he has chosen surface safety, and the cost of that choice does not need to be paid yet. Not every consequence is in a hurry. The second night comes quieter. No bells, no calling voices, only wind and snow. You think of the keys on the floor of the way Heinrich reached for them at the end. Things loved too much rarely leave in the way one hopes. At the edge of the wasteland, the unblessed ground holds its silence, but this silence is not empty. It is full of things, learning how to remain. You turn away, leaving the wooden stake and the footprints without a walker. Beneath the ice, the Oda River holds its breath. In the village, doors close earlier. And between the two, a new rule has been laid down, requiring no signature, only time to be enforced. You hear the scratching before you understand where you are, not the sound of wood breaking, not the panic of someone trying to escape. It is fingernails touching wood in a steady, deliberate rhythm, slow as if counting. One beat, then another. The pause between beats is longer than you want it to be. You realize the coffin is not the only enclosure. Waiting itself is the wall. The air is heavy and cold. You do not breathe the old way, yet the dryness remains like the memory of a throat that once knew thirst. Above you, the earth keeps its silence. Inside, thoughts refuse to lie still. You begin to audit out of a habit that refuses to die. Grain sacks, debts, conditions set accounts, not yet collected. Each number rises and slips away, like dry kernels falling through gaps in wood. You refuse to accept an ending with the ledger still open. To die now is to leave things unfinished, and unfinished is failure. The first night passes without a clear sign. You count your nails to keep rhythm, to prove that time still has shape. On the wooden surface, the scratches fade and darken again, not to find a way out, but to keep the mind from dissolving. You think of the granary, of the bright lock, of how everything once stood in its proper place. You think that if you could touch the keys one more time, everything would return. The thought clings the way dark powder once clung beneath your nails. Outside, you do not see, but you know. Rats gather, not loudly, not running. They arrive by scent, by the memory of grain and wood. The soil atop the coffin settles slightly, very slightly, like a nod. You do not hear footsteps, only feel a change in pressure. The first night ends with a silent agreement between what is waiting and what refuses to release. The second night begins when you realize the body no longer belongs to the old rhythm. Fingers lengthen a little more without pain, without shock. It is simply the extension of intent. The skin turns gray, cooler than the surrounding earth, as if the cold has chosen you as shelter. You are not afraid. Fear is a reflex of those who still have options. You are doing the only rational thing left, holding on. The inner voice returns persistent. Unfair, you think. You kept order while others demanded chaos. You paid on time, locked doors at the proper hour. You protected what needed protection. Death has come to you at the wrong moment, under the wrong terms. You refuse to sign the closing record. You convince yourself this is only a waiting phase, like the long nights that once passed. You continue to count nails, scraping wood, the rhythm steadier than before. Counting is holding authority. Above ground, the rats stand still. No trap sounds. Bait remains untouched, where it once guided them. They no longer need bait. They need a sinner. The earth settles a fraction more, not enough to collapse enough, to remind. You feel a change in the air, a new cold, not belonging to the season. The second night closes with an agreement unsigned but understood. Between the scraping beats, you face a nameless choice. Let go or hold tight. Letting go would make you lighter, you know it would. Light like an empty ledger, like an emptied storehouse. But light is also lost. Holding tight keeps you with the familiar shape, with what has been built. You choose to hold. This choice needs no vow. It happens in the way you keep counting, never missing a beat. The third night arrives with a subtle shift. You no longer feel the weight of the wood as before. The body adapts, or the wood yields. Cold radiates from you, not spreading, simply present. The skin is grayer now, no longer reflecting memories of firelight. The nails are long and hard, not weapons, but tools of persistence. You do not need blood to prove existence. You need time, and time is leaning toward you. From the river, the wind moves across the edge of the wasteland. You do not hear it with your ears, but with pressure changes. The wooden stake trembles once, then again, as if someone is testing a pull. Not strong, not hurried, in rhythm with your counting. You stop for a moment to listen to the correspondence. This is not salvation. This is confirmation. Rats shift, forming a loose ring on the snow. No human tracks leading in, no tracks leaving, only presence. The ground breathes very softly. You realize Tuoli's death has not closed a door. It has only changed the position of the hinge. You are still here because you chose to stay. The rule was set by unblessed earth. 3 nights are enough for a decision to take shape. As the wind from the river strengthens, the grave stake shudders more clearly. The wood makes a small sound, not breaking, but enduring. You place your nails against the wood once more, not scraping, only touching. The counting stops. It is no longer needed. Outside, the snow thins around the grave, as if something has stood up and then stood still. Inside, you hold fast to what you have not released. The 3 nights end not with light, but with readiness. You do not step out. You let the world learn how to come closer. Wind from the river carries the familiar cold, and the wooden stake trembles like a cord pulled tight. At the edge of the wasteland, a decision has completed its shape. Dawn does not arrive with light at once. It arrives with a streak of cold. You stand at the edge of the wasteland as the ground splits softly as a thread pulled too tight. There is no blood. There is no scream. Only cold breath rising from the fissure, thin and even like a greeting that expects no reply. Snow around the grave retreats, not melting, only sliding aside to make room for what is coming. The earth lifts, then settles. A hand touches the surface steady. Nails long and dark press into snow as if touching memory. Heinrich rises slowly, without urgency, without needing to push. His shape is thinner than you remember, his neck unnaturally lengthened, his shoulders narrowed as if the body has learned to conserve space. His skin is gray, refusing the reflection of dawn. His eyes are clouded, a faint phosphorescent sheen flickering within them, not seeking light, but measuring distance. You recognize the difference at once. There is no surge of hunger, no heartbeat chasing blood. Heinrich does not draw breath to live, he exhales. The breath moves ahead of him, cold and fine, carrying something unseen, not teeth, not claws. The seed lives in the breath like an old habit that has changed shelter. You understand that hunting is no longer an act, it is present. Heinrich stands still for a moment, listening to the world by other means. Birds do not sing. Wind from the river moves through, carrying the familiar damp cold. He turns toward the village, then stops. The church rises as a familiar mass, but it does not call. The bell is silent. You feel a decision form without deliberation. Heinrich does not walk toward faith. He walks toward habit. The path to the granary remains a worn line that refuses to disappear. Heinrich moves lightly his steps, leaving no deep marks. Each step draws a low current close to the ground. Rats appear at the edge of sight, not scattering. They gather and flow behind him, unhurried, unforced, like water finding slope. You see the bond reestablished. The granary is not only a place of storage, it is a point of pull. The granary door waits, the old lock hanging crooked, its metal dull. Heinrich does not touch the lock. He places his hand against the wood, and the wood answers with a very small sound, like a heartbeat long forgotten. When the door opens, there is no creak. The air inside is colder than outside, as if breath has been waiting there. Rats pour in without invitation or command. They fill corners, seams, and pathways, learned long ago. The granary changes in silence from shelter into nest. Heinrich walks between the stacked sacks. He does not count. Numbers no longer serve to steady him. He stands and exhales. His breath touches woodcloth air, and you see change without impact. No one collapses. No voice cries out. Only a sensation spreads evenly, like thickening mist. This is how he exists now. He does not need to take. He only needs to be. The rats halt near him, not in fear, but because a new order has been set. They turn and run along old routes, carrying a new scent. The granary learns to breathe in rhythm with Heinrich. You understand that the place has chosen its master, or the master has chosen the place. The two are no longer separate. At the granary door, you see something that should not be there. The flower handprint has returned on the wood clearer than before, as if just placed. A small hand fingers spread flour caught in the grain. You remember it was wiped away once. Heinrich stops before it, looking longer than necessary. The phosphorescent light in his eyes does not waver, but his breathing shifts almost imperceptibly. Not regret, not anger. Recognition. He lifts his hand, does not wipe. Long nails hover at the edge of the print, then stop. Some things no longer need to be erased. Some marks become invitations. Heinrich turns away, leaving the handprint as it is a marker. Rats pass by without smearing it. The granary accepts the print as part of its new structure. Outside, dawn finally brightens enough to define shapes. The village remains closed. No one sees Heinrich rise. No one hears the granary breathe. You stand far enough away to understand this is not Dracula. There is no feast, no red thirst. This is a Nosferatu of habit, of ledgers never closed, of doors locked and never opened. A carrier needing no bite to spread. He stands in the granary, neither living nor dead, by the old measure. Breath spreads evenly, rats move in rhythm, and the child's handprint holds its place on the wood. You realize the reveal is complete without a word. This monster does not come from fangs. It comes from choices repeated long enough to take shape. You hear the scratching before the family has time to name their fear. It does not come from the front door, but from the low window frame, where wind usually slips through at night. The sound is very light, unforced, as if whatever waits outside is only testing the rhythm. The family who once asked for grain wakes at the same moment, each holding breath in a different way. No one asks what it is. They have learned that naming does not make a thing disappear. You stand with them in the narrow room, listening to 4 breaths merge into one uneven pattern. Outside the window, a figure stands still. No knocking, no pounding. The Nosferatu does not need an invitation. It remains motionless, long neck tilted slightly, as if listening to the silence between heartbeats. Its breath touches the glass. Frost gathers, then hardens into strange patterns, uneven like pathways, drawn backward from inside to out. The glass does not break. It simply learns how to become cold. The father grips a kitchen knife. The blade catches weak lamplight, his hand trembling not from fear, but from the absence of anything to strike. There is no movement, no target. A knife is a tool for impact. Here, there is no impact. Only presence pressed close to the threshold, near enough to be felt, far enough to be unreachable. You see his fingers tighten and then loosen, as if the knife itself understands. It does not belong to this moment. Rats rustle on the porch, many of them, but they do not crowd. They form a low band, noses pointed toward the house, not searching for food. Their scent keeps the family inside. Opening the door to flee would mean stepping into the dark current already waiting. Staying means allowing what is outside to continue breathing. The choice stands clear and unbearable. You feel the moment of decision stretch longer than it should, as a cord pulled tight without snapping. They stay. The mother pulls the blanket higher, as if cloth might hold warmth in place. The child does not cry. It watches the frost patterns on the glass, tracing how they spread inch by inch. The Nosferatu does not advance. It does not need to. Its breath remains steady thin, and you realize that each breath is a silent invitation. No command, no spoken curse. Only something is happening because it has been allowed to be there. Time passes in a way no one measures. The oil lamp sinks lower. The cold does not arrive suddenly. It spreads evenly like water soaking into wood. You sense the change before you see it. Warmth in the room thins, not taken, but drawn away. The family presses closer together, yet the space between breaths widens. The father sets the knife down. Metal touches wood, very softly, like an agreement signed without ink. Outside, the Nosferatu remains so still you forget it has shape at all. The breathing continues. Frost hardens into new lines, layering over the old. There is no cry, no sign of struggle. Only a room learning to be silent to a different rhythm, When night reaches its lowest point, the patterns on the glass stop, as if they have done enough. Morning arrives without the familiar sounds. The door does not open. The rats withdraw, leaving the porch bare. The Nosferatu is no longer at the window. No footprints, no drag marks, only cold glass and fading frost lines. You enter the house with thin light. The family lies still, no defensive posture, no sign of pain, as if warmth left first, and the rest simply followed. The room is quiet, as though the air necessary for life has been removed. Word spreads faster than explanation. Villagers stand outside, not crossing the threshold. They look through the doorway, keeping a distance enough to avoid touching what they do not yet understand. No one calls it a common illness. No one dares call it a miracle. Silence does the work of conclusion. Father Wilhelm arrives when the sun is high enough. He does not hurry. He studies the window glass, the wooden frame, the porch floor. Around the frame, fine ash clings, mixed with small dark specks, unlike familiar stains, not the marks of ordinary sickness, not anything he has ever chased away with holy water. He kneels, touches lightly, then pulls his hand back, as if the surface is not meant for prolonged contact. Wilhelm straightens and looks into the quiet room. He does not speak a long prayer. He exhales once, then again. You see the slow, heavy recognition in his eyes. This is not an evil that rushes forward with fangs. This is an evil that stands outside, patient enough to wait for people to choose. He looks toward the porch, where the rats once stood, then toward the granary, at the edge of the village without needing to see it to know. No one names the Nosferatu. There is no need. What remains unseen works better when it is not called. You leave the house with the sense of having witnessed a new rule assert itself. The first house does not fall through violence. It goes dark. And in that silence, you understand the first price has been paid by an entirely human choice. When Wilhelm turns away, the fine ash remains around the frame, unmoved by the wind. The dark specks keep their place like a signature that does not wish to be known. You know this is not the end. It is only how the story teaches the village that the greatest threat does not need to cross the threshold. It only needs permission to stand there, breathe, and wait. The journal opens beneath the low oil lamp. The first line is not a prayer, but a cold conclusion. What is happening is not a plague of God. It wears the shape of plague to pass through frightened doors. You notice the ink pressed heavier than usual, as if the writer forced the thought to stay in place. Father Wilhelm writes in the rhythm of what he has witnessed. Death arrives too quickly, faster than any rites he has ever performed. There is no familiar cycle, no time for final words. Warmth simply leaves, and the room is left silent, as if its air has been withdrawn. He notes the rats, the way they gather without season, without bait. He writes of the cold around the victims' homes, a cold that does not come from wind, but from a presence standing just outside the threshold. You read and realize the journal is more than a record. It is how he forces the world to pause long enough to be understood. The following pages weave observation with questions. Wilhelm goes from house to house, asking in a voice free of accusation, who went to the granary, asking for help, who was refused in front of others, who was humiliated by conditions. You see names repeat in patterns that are not random. The first family, the former guard, a craftsman crushed by grain debt. The stories need no added detail to connect. They arrange themselves. Wilhelm records another shared trait. No one dies while running. No one dies while resisting. They die while staying still, choosing to keep doors shut out of fear of what waits outside more than what stands before them. You realize the journal is holding a mirror to human choice, not to the monster. That weight settles into the lines. The next page lists signs. Fine ash around door frames. Dark specks, unlike common grime. Frost patterns hardened on glass. Rats standing still as if waiting. Wilhelm sketches, positions, distances, and times. He does not name what is coming. He explains how it works. You understand this is evidence, not an accusation. At the page margin, Wilhelm writes a larger question. Inform authorities or the diocese. Wait for rights and papers, or act while time remains thin. His pen lingers here. You imagine his gaze through the church window where rats once stood in a stone ring. The community has no time to wait for answers from afar. The decision is written in a firm hand. He will act for himself with those still close enough to move. The group forms without summons. The blacksmith comes because metal tells him things wood does not. The midwife comes because she understands how breath thins before it ends. The former guard comes because he knows how to stand in darkness without shaking. And a surviving child is brought not for bravery, but because it saw for and remembers. You see, Wilhelm does not choose the strongest. He chooses those who recognize signs. The journal records their first meeting. They do not speak of courage. They speak of rules. Do not open doors out of fear. Do not stay still out of fear. Do not chase rats. Do not believe locks are enough. Wilhelm writes that what comes uses breath, not teeth. Waiting, not violence. The response must therefore be different. Daylight, proper wood, herbs that hold warmth without inviting cold, salt to mark not to banish. The pages quicken. Wilhelm maps paths from the river to the granary. Marks where rats gather thickest, notes the hours when frost deepens around doors. He crosses out old theories of common sickness. You see the pace of inquiry accelerate, not from panic, but because the pieces have agreed to sit close together. The child is questioned last. Wilhelm does not press. He lets silence do the work. When the child speaks, the voice does not shake. It says the thing has returned, and it remembers the door. You see the sentence written exactly as spoken, unsoftened, uncorrected. Wilhelm underlines it. The door is no longer an object. It is memory. The journal closes on a short list. Times, tools, a meeting point before dawn. There is no long prayer. Only one final line was written near the edge of the page, as if space might run out. If this thing wears the shape of plague, it must be stripped of it before it learns another name. You close the journal and understand its role. It asks no permission. It waits for no blessing. It places responsibility in the hands of those still here. Evidence is sufficient. Speed has increased. And in the small room of the church, a group knows the next choice will not allow them to remain still. When the oil lamp goes out, the child's words remain in the air. It has returned, and it remembers the door. The bread decays in their hands before it reaches the ground. You see a woman break a loaf fresh from the oven. The crust still warm, then freeze. The crumb changes color in her palm, splitting into small movements that make her scream. Someone else sees the same thing and drops their food as if dropping a curse. When the bread hits the floor, it is bread again. No maggots, no motion, but the smell of fear has already spread. You understand, this is not the truth of the object, but the truth of a collapsing mind. That night, the village does not sleep. The dreams arrive in unison, as if broadcast at the same hour. Everyone dreams of the granary. The sacks stand in neat rows, then open their mouths. Rats do not burst out. They are already inside the dreamer's mouth, like a thought swallowed by mistake. No detail is needed. Only the sensation of a heavy tongue words, unable to escape. You wake with them, cold sweat on skin, heart racing from something that never touched flesh. By day, hallucinations bleed into waking hours. The smell of moldy grain creeps into kitchens, even while fires burn. Rustling sounds appear where there are no cracks. You see people look at one another longer, searching for stains on each other's hands. Speech fractures. A glance is enough to spark ignition. Decay does not need a body. It feeds on belief. Violence breaks out without planning. One person accuses a neighbor of hiding grain. Another shouts that a house must be burned to make things clean. Fire is spoken of as a simple solution, requiring no thought. You see someone grip a torch not from hatred, but from a need for a clear ending. Fear favors quick answers. Father Wilhelm steps into the center before flame meets wind. He does not shout. He stands still long enough to force eyes toward him. You watch him place salt on the stone ground, scattering it into a rough circle, undecorated. Salt to mark not to banish. He begins a short prayer, steady in rhythm, never raising his voice. The prayer does not promise rescue. It only asks them to remain to breathe together to keep their feet where they are. Wilhelm chooses to hold the people with faith because if he lets them descend into madness, fire will finish the work. The ritual is simple, and it is that simplicity that steadies a few. You see shoulders lower, breath slow. Not everyone returns, but enough to put the torch out. Remember that fear does not disappear when a house burns. Salt rests on stone like a modest boundary. The prayer ends without a crescendo. No miracle, only the return of awareness. When the crowd disperses, those who remain gather in small groups, not from closeness, but from understanding. The blacksmith speaks of metal colder than it should be at night. The midwife speaks of warmth leaving before the eyes close. The former guard speaks of rat paths no longer following bait. You listen and recognize that every fragment points toward a center already known. The granary. The abandoned windmill at the edge was once used to process Heinrich's grain. As dusk thickens, the wind shifts. You smell it before you see its source. Molded grain, sweet and sour, mixed with a cold, metallic note, like freshly ground iron left unattended. The scent comes from the windmill. It is not strong, but persistent, clinging to the nose like a reminder. Rats appear scattered along the path, not running. They stand, then move aside, leaving space where it matters. Wilhelm looks in that direction without asking anyone. He knows the ritual only bought time, not an ending. You feel movement in the small group that is formed. No call is needed, only the act of turning together. The Feast of Rot has revealed what matters most. This monster not only kills, it turns people against one another. The smell from the windmill deepens as darkness rises. You stand at the edge of the village, feeling the wind carry a nameless invitation. Cold metal brushes memory. Molded grain touches hunger. Both once belonged to one man. Now they call back. Ahead, an abandoned place waits to be looked at directly. The mill door opens with a long creak, even though the wind is still. You stop at the threshold and listen as the sound completes its life inside the old wood. The hinge is not rusted, only worn, as if the door has been opened too many times by hands that never needed force. Inside, the darkness does not retreat. It waits. The group enters in a natural order, no commands spoken. The blacksmith goes first because the metal on his body reacts to the cold air. The midwife follows because she knows how to see small signs others miss. The former guard stands slightly to the left, used to watching exits. The child stays close to you, not from fear, but because it remembers the way. Father Wilhelm closes the door, but does not seal it. A choice left open. The mill does not growl. It breathes. Each breath is the sound of wood expanding and contracting, slow and steady, like an old body holding balance. On the floor, rat carcasses lie scattered where they make sense. Not piled, not displayed. Flea husks crumble near warmer corners where metal once held heat. Small bones appear exactly where gears meet the ground, as if pulled in and then forgotten. You realize everything here is where it belongs. That is what makes the room frightening. The smell of molded grain clings to your throat, mixed with a cold, metallic note, so clean it feels indifferent. You move deeper and see Heinrich's old grain store at the edge of the mill. The sacks are torn, not from hunger, but from testing. The rips are straight, not ragged. Rat tracks form clear paths, crossing like a map. Not a map to get lost, a map to return. You understand why the rats flow here. This place remembers them. Wilhelm kneels and lightly touches a sack. Flour dust clings to his fingertip, grayer than it should be. He does not wipe it away. He follows the paths with his eyes, how they converge and scatter. The blacksmith taps the main shaft. The sound that answers is not hollow. It is full. The midwife points to cold streaks along the walls where breath has passed again and again. The child looks upward at the still blades and shakes its head very slightly. Not above, here. The mill becomes a character when you stand still long enough. It does not need movement to show intention. It holds memory in wood, in dust, in repeated paths. You feel as though you are standing inside the belly of something that no longer digests the old way. It chews time. It chews habit. It chews the choices repeatedly. The choice appears as clearly as a lantern half covered. Act now, while darkness still holds advantage, or wait for dawn, when light will thin the corners. Wilhelm looks at each person. No one argues. Safety is spoken first, then silence. They decide to wait for dawn. The decision sounds reasonable. It has saved others before. You accept it because you have seen what light does to fear. The consequence does not wait to be recorded. Waiting means letting time flow, and here time does not favor people. As the group withdraws, you hear the mill breathe more clearly, as if relieved to be alone. Rats shift along new paths, widening the map. In the village, other houses are marked not by claws or teeth, but by breath. You do not see it happen. You know it is happening. Dawn has not yet come. Darkness still suffices for quiet work to finish. When you return to the mill before first light, the metallic cold is heavier. On the eastern wall there is a new mark, a child's handprint. You recognize it instantly, though its shape has changed. The lines that once held flour are now blackened as if lightly burned from within. No smoke, no falling ash. Only wood darkened deep into the grain. The print is not larger. It is deeper. Wilhelm stands before it without touching. The blacksmith steps back once. The midwife closes her eyes for a brief beat, as if rereading something she already knew. The child looks at the mark and nods very slightly. It remembers the door. It remembers being seen. You understand the message without words. This is not only a nest. This is a record. The mill is no longer merely a shelter, it is memory. Each footprint is a sentence. Each cold streak is a period. And that burned handprint is a title. Waiting for dawn gave what lives here enough time to write more. You feel the weight of the earlier choice, not as a mistake, but as the cost of carefulness that arrived too late. When the first light touches the wall edge, the handprint does not fade. It sharpens. The surrounding wood contracts as if making space. You realize the reveal is complete. A lair is not a dark cave to be rushed. A lair is where memory is fed. The mill chews bones not from hunger, but to keep them. You turn away when dawn grows strong enough to define shapes. No one speaks what everyone is thinking. Waiting gave time the chance to do its work, and time in this story always sides with what does not need to hurry. Dawn rises enough to separate outlines from shadow. The Nosferatu stands motionless in the open space of the mill, its long neck slightly inclined like a marker that does not need to move. You realize the abnormality is not in it, but in the air around it. The cold is denser, pressing against the chest, shortening every breath. Those who stand closest step back not from fear, but from dizziness, as if entering thin air at high altitude. The blacksmith has kindled the forge before light touches the walls. Iron glows red, not as a threat, but as readiness. Heated metal releases a faint sound, a familiar whisper to him. Father Wilhelm lays salt in rough rings, without ornament. The herbs are bound neatly, not hung for display, but placed where the wind will pass. Every preparation minimizes movement. No one speaks of attacking. From the beginning, you have known that striking the body is not the answer. They observe. The rats do not scatter. They form low currents around the grain store, like water channels. The tracks from the night before sharpen in the light. The paths converge on the torn sacks. Wilhelm studies that map and understands. Touching it does not matter. The nest must be broken. Grain store and rats form a system. That system keeps the breath anchored. The choice settles on the ground heavy as salt. Save the grain or burn it all. Grain means short survival. Burning means long hunger. Villagers stand at the edge, no one willing to speak what they think. You see hands tighten when eyes pass over intact sacks. No one wants to burn what they will need. Hesitation stretches longer than it should, like a cord pulled too tight. The Nosferatu does not move. It does not need to. The air continues its work. Rats begin to spill not in a rush, but in layers slipping past boots, past salt lines not yet sealed. Someone in the group slips and falls. No pain, only surprise. But surprise ignites panic like a spark in dry grass. Another person steps back, breaking a salt line. The rats exploit the opening immediately. You see the system react faster than people. The blacksmith raises the heated iron, not to strike, but to force space backward. Heat cuts through cold, for a moment carving out a pocket of breath. Wilhelm scatters more salt, his hands steady. He speaks a short prayer, not to ask, but to keep rhythm. The midwife pulls the fallen person upright and checks quickly. The child stands still, not crying. It has seen this in dreams, and dreams no longer surprise it. Hesitation has taken its price. Rats spill another layer, widening the map. The grain store does not collapse. It opens. More sacks tear, not from hunger, but from the spread. You understand that every delayed second marks another house. This is not a battle to win. It is an equation to end. Wilhelm looks at the villagers. His gaze does not command. He asks with silence, "Burn now and face hunger. Do not burn and fade into death." One person nods first very slightly. Then another. Agreement does not arrive in unison, but it arrives enough. No one blocks the way. Fire is brought to the grain store without spectacle. The blacksmith presses heated iron to wood along chosen lines where paths converge. Salt is scattered to guide flame, not let it wander. The herbs burn into thick, bitter smoke that keeps cold from slipping through easily. The storehouse begins to change its scent, no longer only mold and cold metal. There is smoke. There is an ending. The Nosferatu remains motionless. But when fire meets the system, something shifts. It opens its eyes. They do not blink. The phosphorescent light within does not seek flame or grown faces. It fixes on the child. You see that look carries no hatred. It carries recognition. The door, the handprint. Memory aligning. The child does not retreat. It stands within the salt circle, gripping your coat. You feel its breathing steady and slow. Not courage, but understanding that fear is no longer a place to stand. Wilhelm positions himself between the gaze and the child, not shielding, only standing. The blacksmith feeds the fire, one more measure thickening the smoke. The grain store begins to fail from within, not loudly. Rats withdraw along old routes, then scatter disoriented. The system breaks. Without touching the body, the Nosferatu's breath thins, not gone, but unanchored. You feel the pressure in the air ease, fraction by fraction. Dawn climbs higher, but the feeling is not salvation. Hunger is coming. The village will pay. But in this moment, they remain standing. Fire does the work of fire. Salt holds the boundary, and the Nosferatu's gaze stays on the child, like a question without an answer. When the storehouse burns enough to no longer be a nest, Wilhelm raises his hand to stop. No one cheers. No one celebrates. You understand the tactic has succeeded at the highest cost. The Nosferatu still stands there, unmoving, eyes open, and in the strengthening light, you know this confrontation is not finished. It has only changed shape. The first to light the fire is not Father Wilhelm. You see it clearly in the moment when the group is still holding its breath. The child steps forward, holding a bundle of rowan wood soaked with resin. No one stops it. No one gives an order. Fire touches wood in a short, clean contact, like a decision that has been waiting for its bearer. Roles reverse without a sound. The small performs the work of ending. The fire takes faster than you expect, not because of wind, but because everything is already prepared to burn. The old grain store and the adjacent windmill stand like two aging lungs drawing flame deep inside. Rowan burns differently from common wood, sharp and green, in scent, cutting the air clean. Salt is scattered along pre-marked lines, not to repel, but to lock. The rat paths are severed by rough, white streaks, ugly but exact. Sound rises in layers. First, the rats squeal not in panic, but in confusion, as if their map has failed. Then wood cracks and pops in short, steady beats, like a clock being dismantled. The cold reacts like something living forced backward. It does not vanish at once. It contracts, thins, retreats to corners, not yet reached by flame. You feel your chest open a little more enough to draw a deeper breath. The Nosferatu stands within the widening light, motionless as before. No rage, no curse. When fire consumes the final structure of the nest, it does not scream as in stories meant to help people sleep. It goes out, not suddenly, not dramatically. Like a flame deprived of oxygen, the phosphorescent glow in its eyes fades with each thinning breath until there is no breath left to follow. The long neck dips slightly like a weight finally set down after being held too long. You feel the haunting quiet of this ending. There is no loud victory to cling to. The rats withdraw beyond the salt circles, scatter and disappear into unburned darkness. No pursuit follows. None is needed. When the nest is broken and the roots sealed, gathering has no purpose. The windmill collapses from within without a roar. Gears fall together, releasing one last cold metallic contact, then are taken by flame. The grain store burns deep, fine flour, lifting into a heavy gray cloud. The choice appears again late, but still a choice. Douse the fire to save what grain remains, or let it burn through. The villagers look at one another, at the flames, at the sacks that once promised short survival. You see hunger take shape more clearly than the monster ever did. Hunger has form. Hunger has a calendar. Dousing the fire could buy weeks of life, but saving it would also preserve the memory of the nest. No one says this aloud. They let the fire work. No one steps forward. No one calls a stop. Consequence arrives immediately in the change of smell. When the grain is gone, the familiar sweetness disappears, leaving only ash and wood. Short safety dissolves into smoke. The village will starve, not a threat. A calculation. You see Wilhelm acknowledge it with a very small nod, like entering figures without ink. The blacksmith lowers the heated iron. The midwife holds the child close, not covering its eyes. The former guard studies the salt-locked paths, as if looking at roads that will never lead back. When the windmill collapses fully, the fire settles, shifting from blaze to smolder. The Nosferatu is no longer a shape to see, no separate ash, no marker to point to, only an absence that requires no explanation. You realize this is the true payoff. Nobody to convince doubters. Only a village still standing and an empty storehouse. Ash lifts as the river wind shifts. Fine gray particles fall slowly, dusting the ice of the Oda River. The ice does not melt. It changes color. The river accepts the remainder of the story without question. You watch and understand where the price has been paid, where it belongs. No one is exempt. The fire dims, leaving heated ground and the scent of ash. Salt remains white and coarse, holding the boundary a while longer. Burned rowan leaves, blackened charcoal that does not need immediate clearing. The child sets down the empty bundle, hands dark with ash steady. In that small act, you see another ending. Not the end of fear, but the end of borrowed authority. Dawn passes its highest point without salvation. It brings work, clearing ash, rationing what remains, planning routes. You hear short sentences, no complaints. They know the cost and have paid it. That knowledge does not make the cost lighter. It only makes it real. As the wind strengthens, ash continues drifting toward the river, settling across the ice. A thin gray layer binds village to water. You stand there and feel the final connection drawn in what remains. The monster is extinguished. The village has lost its food, and the story does not permit relief. Ash on ice keeps its silence, a reminder that not every victory is allowed to be called salvation. Years later, you stand before a large metal door, neon light reflecting into cold, straight lines. A camera turns slowly, evenly, without blinking. There is no wind, yet you hear scratching. The sound is identical. The rhythm is identical. Not trying to break free, but counting. You do not know why you recognize it so quickly. Some sounds require no explanation. They go straight to memory. Inside goods are stacked higher than a person orderly and clean. The smell is not moldy grain, but new cardboard, plastic, and metal. Yet the cold is the same. The air keeps its distance. You walk between wide aisles, hearing your footsteps echo back. The warehouse door locks with a code. No click. Only a green indicator light. Everything says this place is safe. Everything says this place is controlled. You remember another wooden door. You remember flour caught in the grain. You remember how a small handprint can last longer than words. No one speaks the old name anymore. There is no need. Names matter less than structure. A warehouse is a warehouse. A door is a door. And you are standing on one side of the threshold. Somewhere beyond this place, someone is hungry. You do not see them here. You see charts. You see numbers. You see delivery schedules. Everything makes sense in a way that feels wrong. Reason is the best way not to look sideways. You hear the scratching again, very faint near the floor. Not rats. Perhaps a cable brushing metal. Perhaps memory testing an old rhythm. You place your hand on the metal door. Cold. No flour. No mark. But when you pull your hand away, there is a faint smear like breath on glass. You wipe it away by habit. The smear fades quickly, but you know what has been here does not need to linger to be remembered. It only needs repetition. You do not think in large words. You think about storage, about how stockpiling becomes a habit, how habit becomes a system, how a system does not need malice to harm. It only needs to remain still. It only needs doors to close on time. It only needs locks that do not rust. Images link together in your mind without order. An old grain store, a windmill, a window closed out of fear, a rough circle of salt, a child lighting a fire, a layer of ash is drifting toward a river. You realize these images are not the past. They are instructions. No one hands you a document. You learn by living long enough with choices. The camera turns. The neon light does not flicker. The scratching comes again this time, from behind the metal door. No one else hears it. You know this because if they did, it would be logged as maintenance. This sound does not belong to repair. It belongs to what happens when doors close and someone remains outside. You remember the flower handprint. This time when you turn back, you see a very faint, darkened area on the metal low to the ground. Not flour, not ash, just a patch where the metal seems to have been touched by a warmer hand. The shape is unclear, but you recognize the size. Small, familiar. You do not name the feeling that rises. Naming would soften it, and you do not need comfort. You stand still. You do not open the door. You also do not add another lock. You remain in the middle where choices make no noise. You think about storing while others starve, not as sin, but as procedure. One small decision for security, another for efficiency, then one to protect the previous decision. There is no moment when you declare you have become something else. Only reasonable steps join together. The scratching stops, not because you have done right, but because it has been acknowledged. Some things only need to know they were heard. In the distance, a truck engine starts. Nearby, the camera keeps turning. The modern world does not need the darkness to do its work. It needs steady light. You look back at the metal door one last time. The faint mark has lightened, but it has not fully disappeared. Metal remembers differently than wood, but it remembers. You understand the payoff is not in naming the monster. It is in recognizing the mirror. Not a mirror of faces, a mirror of actions. When you leave, you pull the door closed. The lock makes a small, precise sound. No one objects. No one records it. Outside, the night is cooler. You breathe out, and the breath vanishes at once. You do not know whether you have done enough. You only know you stood there. You heard it. You saw the handprint, and you understood the loop. The scratching returns very softly, blending into the sound of machinery. No one can tell it apart anymore. That is how it survives best. No mystery, no fangs. Only doors, handprints, and time. Winter will come again. When it does, you will stand before other doors with other locks and reasons that sound just as reasonable as today. The question does not need to be asked by anyone else. It is already there, cold and brief, like metal beneath your hand. When the next winter comes, what will you lock away?